What do you get when a heart diseased Texas chicken farmer, a bankrupt British sports car company, and a very unhappy Ford Motor executive all walk into the same room? You get the Shelby Cobra, and you get what I'd call the most dangerous gamble in American automotive history. Welcome back. I'm Marc, and this is Gearhead Man. Today we're telling the full story of how Carroll Shelby built the car that changed American racing forever, and why, at every step of the way, it should have failed. Let's start where every great story starts, with a man who has nothing to lose. Carroll Shelby was born in Leesburg, Texas in 1923, a sharecropper's son. He drove like he was being chased, and he raced anything with wheels and an engine, motorcycles, midgets, whatever he could get his hands on. He was the kind of driver who made other drivers nervous just watching him warm up. By the mid 1950s, he was one of the most naturally gifted sports car drivers in the world. He raced in Europe, competed against factory teams from Ferrari and Aston Martin, and did it largely as a privateer, meaning he was outspending his budget and outdriving the factory boys at the same time. Then came Le Mans. In 1959, Shelby and co-driver Roy Salvadori drove an Aston Martin DBR1 to outright victory at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. World champions, the absolute pinnacle of endurance motorsport. Shelby stood on the top step of the podium and looked like he'd been doing it his whole life. And shortly after, he was finished racing, not by choice. Carroll Shelby had a serious heart condition, a congenital defect that had been quietly working against him since childhood. His doctors told him flat out, if you keep racing, you will not live very long. The stress, the sustained physical exertion, the sustained adrenaline, his heart simply couldn't maintain it at competitive pace. So Shelby did what any reasonable man in his position would do. He went looking for a faster car to build instead. Here's a question worth asking. Why did the Shelby Cobra end up being a British car with an American engine? That sounds more like a fever dream than a business plan. The answer is AC Cars, a small, almost artisanal sports car manufacturer in Thames Ditton, Surrey, England. AC had been building automobiles since 1901. In the 1950s, they produced a car called the Ace, a beautiful lightweight roadster with an aluminum body and a hand-formed tubular steel chassis. Elegant, almost delicate looking. But underneath that English gentleman's exterior was a genuinely competitive racing machine. The Ace had proven itself in British club racing and international events. It was quick, it handled beautifully, and it was honest. It didn't try to be something it wasn't. But the problem was its engine. AC had been using a Bristol unit derived from a pre-war BMW design. Serviceable, period correct, and by 1961, completely out of production. AC had a gorgeous proven chassis and no power plant to put in it. They were, in the politest possible British sense, in serious trouble. Shelby had seen the Ace in the late 1950s and filed the idea away. When he could no longer race, he wrote letters to Ferrari, to Aston Martin, to Maserati, to every major automaker he could reach, pitching the same idea. Give me an engine and I'll build you a world beater on that British chassis. The letter was polite, specific, and completely unambiguous about what he intended to do. Ferrari said no. Aston said no. Maserati didn't bother to reply. Ford said yes. Now let's be honest about why Ford said yes. It wasn't pure generosity. This was 1961, and Ford had a problem. They had tried to buy Ferrari and been publicly humiliated. Enzo Ferrari walked away from a deal that was essentially complete. At the last minute, he decided he couldn't hand over control of his racing program to an American corporation. Ford was furious. The boardroom in Dearborn was furious. And from that fury came the Total Performance Program, Ford's systematic campaign to dominate motorsport worldwide. But that, as they say, is another video. The point is this: Ford wanted Ferrari's blood. And here comes Carroll Shelby with a lightweight British chassis, a proven racing pedigree, and a pitch to build a genuine competition machine around a Ford small block V8. Lee Iacocca, then Ford's vice president of marketing, approved a supply of Ford Fairlane 260 cubic inch V8 engines. No money exchanged hands initially, just engines. Shelby had his power plant. The first prototype was built in just 8 days. 8 days. They called it CSX 0001, Cobra Shelby Experimental Number 1. It came to life in January 1962 at Shelby's shop in Venice, California. The 260 V8 dropped into that AC chassis with almost no modification required. The dimensions lined up as though someone had planned it. Engineers called it a happy accident. Shelby called it destiny. Either way, the Shelby Cobra was born. Road and Track tested the prototype in 1962 and called it the fastest accelerating production car they had ever tested. 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds. In 1962, with a small block V8 and a borrowed British chassis, the Cobra's racing debut came in the spring of 1962 at Riverside International Raceway in California. Billy Krause qualified on the front row. The car was genuinely, shockingly fast. Everything Shelby had promised Ford it would be. But it was also fragile. A hub failure took Krause out before he could show the world what the Cobra could do. Shelby went back to his shop, refined the car, and by 1963, the Cobras were terrorizing the SCCAA production series with a systematic efficiency that made competitors genuinely angry. They weren't just winning races, they were winning them by margins that called the integrity of the competition into question. Officials looked at the Cobra and could find nothing wrong. It was legal, it was just better. By 1964, Shelby had his eyes on the FIA World Sports Car Championship, Ferrari's home turf, the series they had dominated for a decade. To compete internationally, Shelby needed a more aerodynamic machine. The open Cobra Roadster was brutally fast in a straight line, but generated enough drag to be a liability at circuits like Le Mans and Daytona, where high-speed stability mattered as much as raw power. The answer was the Cobra Daytona Coupe. Designed by Pete Brock, a young Shelby employee who had studied aerodynamics seriously enough to know what he was doing, the Daytona Coupe was a closed-body version of the Cobra that cleaved through the air instead of fighting it. 6 were built, just 6, and they were enough. In 1965, the Shelby Cobra Daytona Coupe won the FIA Manufacturers Championship GT class, the first, and to this day, the only American manufacturer to claim that title. A Texas chicken farmer with a borrowed British chassis had just beaten Ferrari on the world stage. Enzo Ferrari, by most accounts, was not amused. By 1964, Shelby wanted more power. The 260 had already become a 289, and the 289 was winning races. But Shelby was Shelby. He wanted the 427. Ford's 427 cubic inch big block V8 was a monster. It made somewhere between 410 and 485 horsepower, depending on who you asked and how honest they were being. The same engine was winning NASCAR superspeedway races in the hands of factory Ford teams, in a car weighing over 4,000 pounds. Shelby pulled the 289 out of the Cobra chassis, widened the body by 3 inches on each side to clear the bigger engine block, stiffened the frame significantly, and dropped in the 427. The result was the 427 Cobra, and by virtually every contemporary account, it was terrifying to drive. At a time when most sports cars weighed 3,000 pounds and their drivers considered 100 miles an hour a significant achievement, the 427 Cobra weighed roughly 2,200 pounds and could reach 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. With no traction control, no ABS, no power steering, no electronic safety systems of any kind, just you, 2 pedals, a gear shift, and 500 foot-pounds of torque waiting to remind you that you are not as good a driver as you think you are. Contemporary road testers used words like savage, violent, and in one case, genuinely frightening. These were professional automotive journalists who drove race cars for a living. The 427 Cobra made them nervous. Even Shelby admitted it. That car will kill you if you let it. He was not wrong. In 1966, Carroll Shelby took the 427 and decided it wasn't enough. He strapped a 427 engine and a pair of Paxton superchargers into a Cobra. Output, roughly 800 horsepower. Weight, still under 2,200 pounds. He called it the Super Snake. He built 2. The first went to a well-known entertainer who was a serious car enthusiast at the time. He drove it once, returned it within days, and reportedly wanted nothing more to do with it. The second went to a customer in California. That car killed its owner. He lost control on a California highway and plunged off a cliff into the Pacific Ocean. Shelby shut the project down immediately. He refused to build a third. He told reporters quietly, "That car was my biggest mistake." And that's the thing about Carroll Shelby that the brochures never fully capture. He was a gambler, yes, but he wasn't reckless. He had instincts. He knew where the line was. And with the Super Snake, he admitted he had crossed it. The Shelby Cobra ended production in 1967. Just 998 original Cobras were built across all variants. Today, an authentic 427 Cobra commands $2 million at auction. Easily. A genuine Daytona Coupe is worth considerably more. In 2023, CSX 2000, the first production Cobra ever built, sold for over $13 million. For a car that began life as a letter to Ford and a borrowed British chassis. But the Cobra's legacy isn't measured in auction prices. It's measured in what came next. Carroll Shelby went straight from the Cobra program to helping Ford build the GT40, the car that ended Ferrari's stranglehold on Le Mans by winning the race 4 consecutive times from 1966 to 1969. Shelby's team ran the winning cars in 1966 and 1967. The same fury that built the Cobra had now taken the most prestigious endurance race in the world away from the most prestigious racing manufacturer in history. He didn't stop there. In 1965, working alongside Ford and the newly introduced Mustang, Shelby created the GT350, a high-performance variant that transformed a sporty pony car into a genuine road race weapon. The GT500 followed. Both cars carried his name. Both became icons. Both are now worth extraordinary money at auction. And more importantly, both proved that Shelby's talent wasn't just for exotic boutique machines. He could elevate a mass-market car and make it something special. Then, in the 1990s, Lee Iacocca came calling again, this time from Chrysler. The project was the Dodge Viper, a car so deliberately old-fashioned in its philosophy, so deliberately brutal in its execution, that it could only have come from a man who'd spent his career building cars that didn't care about your comfort. Side exhaust pipes, no exterior door handles initially, an 8-liter V10, no traction control at launch. Shelby was involved from the earliest design stages, and if the Viper feels spiritually related to the 427 Cobra, that's not an accident. Carroll Shelby died on May 10th, 2012 at the age of 89, which, given the heart condition that ended his racing career in 1959 and the doctors who told him he wouldn't last long, was itself a kind of quiet triumph. He outlived the diagnosis by over 50 years. He outlived some of the cars he built. He outlived the executives who bet against him, the competitors who laughed at the chicken farmer with the borrowed British chassis, and the doctors who told him to slow down. He never did slow down. That's the story of the Shelby Cobra, the most dangerous gamble in American automotive history. A car born from a bad heart, a borrowed chassis, and a man who refused to accept what he was supposed to be. Honestly, Shelby would have had it no other way. Thanks for watching Gearhead Man. I'm Marc Paulus. If you enjoyed the story, like, subscribe, ring the bell, and do all the algorithmic rituals required to keep this channel alive in the digital wasteland. Keep it loud, keep it fast, and never trust the brochure.